my hope is that this initiative, and when we get more people, continue to get more people involved in understanding much money is being invested in different projects and in different neighborhoods, it gives you a different perspective. It's just a matter of, do you believe it can happen?
Welcome to Six Pillars in Action, a podcast that takes you inside the work, the people, and the purpose behind one of the most meaningful investments in African American communities right here in Indianapolis. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, partners, and change makers connected to the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative to talk about what's happening, why it matters, and how real transformation is taking shape across our city. Whether you're a community member, an organization doing the work, or someone who simply wants to understand how change happens, this conversation is for you.
Welcome to another episode of the Six Pillars in Action podcast, where we take an in-depth look at the incredible work of the IAAQLI, or the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. This episode, we have the pleasure of being able to sit down with Tony Mason, president of the Indy Urban League, and learning more about the history of this process and how we got here. So welcome.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We made it. We were just talking about that. We made it to 2026, y'all. So through this process, I know all of us want to jump in to talk about money, talk about, all the things, but we're going to take a little step back and talk about what was the why that brought this about, and what were the conditions in Indianapolis that made the creation of the IAAQLI necessary.
Well, when you think about IAAQLI, sometimes people focus on the moment. But the challenges facing African Americans in Indianapolis and in Marion County have long persisted. We're talking about decades. So we're talking about higher unemployment rates, lower wages, jobs without benefits, substandard housing, underperforming schools, poor access to quality health care. And so when you think about the social determinants of health, there's always been the challenge that our people have faced here in this city. And so those things had not changed up to a certain point. And so we know that many families are still struggling with those very same things. And so we know that the IAAQLI is intended to be catalytic as well as transformative. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish ultimately when we go back and we evaluate the initiative and its impact on the community.
Yeah, I mean, especially at a time where race-based assistance is under such attack.
Yes.
Right? And so it kind of shifted the ground under our feet a little bit, because it was like we were operating with this belief that everybody believes that we should help folks that are struggling, right? And then now it's in question. Yes,
it's in question, and not just help or assistance for African Americans or other people of color. We're talking about just struggling families in general now, where there appears to just be no appetite or care for helping struggling families.
Yeah.
And so that's terribly unfortunate, but I think the blessing that we have is that we've been able to do this work over the past 5 years, thanks to this amazing grant from the Lilly Endowment to the National Urban League of $100 million. And while it's certainly a lot of money, it's more catalytic in nature than transformational. And so it's given us a great opportunity to attempt to address some of the challenges.
Yeah. So I know you all were very intentional about how you approach these challenges, and you guys worked through a 6 pillars framework.
Yes.
So tell me about how that worked better, especially at the start before you guys knew it would work, right?
Yes.
Why take that approach rather than an isolated investment approach?
Well, absolutely. But when you go back to the very foundation, so to speak, of IAAQLI, the focus was on essentially implementing a place-based grant-making effort that would call for increased collaboration across the community, organizations working together with key institutions to impact the quality of life for African Americans, touching on education, entrepreneurship, employment, health, housing, civic engagement, leadership development, and organizational capacity building. So when you go back to the very beginning of how we chose to go about this, then it was critical for us to embark on a process whereby which we would gather input, first and foremost from everyday citizens and families and young people in this community, as well as getting input from grassroots leaders, grass tops, faith-based, civic, municipal, but also incorporating input from practitioners, thought leaders, experts into that mix in order to work towards establishing what would be the priorities, strategies, or goals of the initiative. Because we could have very easily said, well, you know what, we're going to pick 5 or 6 projects to get behind and go from there. But then that would not have created the opportunity and given voice to the concerns and the challenges that everyday people face. It also would not have allowed for the opportunity for us to engage organizations and institutions across multiple sectors to get them to collaborate and to work together to address challenges. Because far too often, our organizations, groups, and institutions have not been at the table to address challenges that face our people, frankly.
Right. Right. And I love a collaborative approach because it feels like it creates this ecosystem of support where we're kind of handing each other off,
Yes.
until we get to a place of like where we can sustain ourselves, which is, I think it's so beautiful, one, because it's just such a beautiful picture of support, but then also it acknowledges that like we need each other through this. And I think that's sometimes what's missing in like collaboration. It's like the collaboration exists and is necessary because we need each other. We can't do it all alone.
We absolutely do need each other. And while we can think across the community and consider organizations and institutions, and we can always find something that they could be doing better or the leadership could be doing differently. But the reality of it is we have a lot of organizations that are doing great work in the community, and so how do we leverage the strengths of those organizations to work together? Because the reality of it is in Indianapolis, poverty is not confined to one section of town or one neighborhood. It's all over Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And so we have to have service providers, community organizations that are addressing these issues in all of our neighborhoods. And so that's another important part of this in terms of building the ecosystem to address challenges in our neighborhoods throughout the city.
And was there, as you guys were choosing these organizations that you were going to work with, was there intentionality around like filling in those gaps? So like, let's say you have youth organizations that are serving folks from 15 to 24, right? Mm-hmm. Was there intentionality around make sure we're plugging in those holes? Like, because what happens when they turn 24?
That's right.
What happens when,
Very, very much intentional in terms of representation across the community. And thankfully, a number of the individuals that were involved in those very first conversations also played a role in helping us to inform who should be a part of conversations. And so for the first time, in many instances, we had scenarios where, let's just say legacy institutions, whether it's the Urban League or LISC, now you're at the table with the Ross Foundation or Circle Up Indy, and I could name a number of others where you're having these conversations, having dialogues, and talking about the real challenges that exist. Because I may, as the leader of the Indianapolis Urban League, see or understand a challenge facing the community at a certain level, but at that neighborhood or grassroots level, there's someone who may be going door to door on a daily basis helping people, and they have an important perspective to share, as well as that, frankly, of the very people we all hope to assist and serve on a daily basis, those struggling families that oftentimes don't know where to turn or do not have a voice and will never be surveyed walking down the street.
Yep. There's, I know we started to touch on the 6 pillars, and you named them. When you guys went to these thought leaders, went to these community leaders, you said, you reach an array of folks. What did that actually look like to get that data to create these 6 pillars?
So it's a combination of anecdotal conversations, interviews, surveys, community sessions, if you will, or conversations. A lot was done to encourage that discussion, but we also we're making sure to encourage those participants to bring the data, share the data, talk from that perspective. Because I think it's very easy for us to talk, qualitatively around an issue or something we saw when we drove down the street or when we walked into a school that needed a lot of resources and help. Because ultimately, our hope is that that becomes the basis for how we all move and work together in the community. Because when we think about resources and philanthropy, a lot of that is going to be driven not just by emotion and qualitative discussion, quantitatively. What if we make this investment, if we come alongside the work you're doing, because this work will have to carry on. We want to make sure that our organizations and our leaders are prepared for those discussions and are able to work strategically in how they move to get involved and be at the table and stay at the table.
Yeah. I think it probably to the small organizations like mine, when you hear measurable outcomes, it kind of like, ugh, because it is all the less fun stuff, right? It is all the data, but it's like, how can we measure? How can we see? And, more importantly, how can we evaluate if what we're doing is effective?
Yes.
If we're not making sure that that the numbers are there, that the data is there, and that we're growing in a positive direction or even getting better. So that's something that we overlook. It's like, are you doing a great thing by feeding, 10 people a week? Yes. But what if that was able to scale to 20 or 200 with simple changes? But you don't know because you don't keep no data.
And that's crucial in these conversations. And especially now, as you mentioned earlier, with all the attacks against anything from DEI to any sort of race-based supports for initiatives. Now more than ever, we have to have the data to help make the case and to support. It was always important, but in this climate now, it is 100% necessary, because if you don't have it, the person sitting across from you may very well believe in your cause or the work that you're doing, but you have to give that person the ammunition that they need to make the case to whoever they may have to convince to fund your initiative or project.
Yeah. So we're talking about money now. So nearly $90 million was the investment. And why was it important to look at it from that scale?
It was important to look at it at such a large, significant scale because the problems and the challenges are so large and significant. When you talk about over 30% of African Americans being poor, over 30% being housing cost burdened. We know about the low education attainment rates. We know that we've always had unemployment rate that's been 2 or 3 times higher than that of Caucasians in the community. The challenges that we're facing with health outcomes, they've always been staggering. And so, again, $100 million is a lot. $90 million in investments is a lot, but if anything, it's just catalytic. It's the start. And so our hope is that through the over 200 grants that we've awarded thus far, is that it's work that is not only impactful, but that it's sustainable and can be carried on with additional investments, whether it be from the philanthropic sector or for those of us who, live in the neighborhood and understand what our elders went through. We now have to also step up and invest in our organizations and our causes, because if we don't, then how do we convince others to do the same?
Right. And why do you believe this funding moment is historically significant for Indianapolis, especially for our African American community?
Well, let me say this. I'm not originally from here, but my understanding is this is the single largest investment of this type going towards organizations that are committed to serving and impacting the quality of life of African Americans specifically. My hope is that while it's significant in the moment, that it just becomes commonplace, because we see staggering investments made all the time in other communities or towards other causes and people. And so we want this to become the norm, where we're no longer talking about it being historic.
Yeah.
And so our hope is that through telling the success stories and the impact of the initiative, that other funders will step up, as well as individuals who, have been blessed with wealth or whatever, could also contribute to the effort as well.
This wasn't a part of our questions list, but
Sure.
I just want to hear your perspective on this. I remember one time, especially out here on the Far East Side, we were fighting about $900,000 that was going to food security.
Yes.
And so we were going down to the city council to argue about it, and we were there. They were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in development projects that were happening downtown,
Yes.
right? And I remember sitting there thinking, like, we are fighting over $900,000, and they're in here talking about hundreds of millions with ease.
Yes.
And so I guess I just want to hear your perspective on, there's a lot of folks in our community, they'll say, money can't solve these problems, but it does play a significant role. So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. When people say that, and this is just my perspective and opinion, oftentimes it's either people who have money that say that to people who don't have money, or unfortunately, it may be an individual responding through, a deficit lens of sorts. Because if all you know are challenges and the lack of solutions, responses, and investments, then that's all you can speak to. My hope is that this initiative, and when we get more people, continue to get more people involved in understanding the political process and going to city, county council meetings and understanding how much money is being invested in different projects and in different neighborhoods, it gives you a different perspective. It's just a matter of, do you believe it can happen, and can the work get done? Because given where we find ourselves in this moment in time, we're going to need 10 or 20 times this investment in order to continue to have an impact and to sustain and to grow various initiatives and organizations. And so it starts with us believing and understanding that, yes, we should fight for that $900,000,
Yes.
but understand that there's so many resources out here in the community. Even take, for example, this initiative. This was the result of multiple phone calls.
Yeah.
And the Lilly Endowment being able to do it because of the resources that they have at their disposal. Well, you've got the Lilly Endowment, you've got a number of foundations and entities in the community that have the ability to put a lot of resources out here to address problems. Now, you can have the dollars, but the work still has to be done, and that's why the investments in organizational capacity building, leadership development becomes crucial, because now that we have organizations who in many instances have substantial dollars to do the work, we have to make sure that they're prepared and ready to do the work. If for no other reason, our people are counting on them, our families, our young people. So we have to get the work done.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, talking about the history. Make sure you come back. We will be back with Willis Bright to talk more about the IAAQLI and how we've gotten here.
Coming up next on the Six Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
Welcome back to the Six Pillars in Action podcast. I am your host, Samantha Douglas, and we are back with Willis Bright from the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, actually the chair of the AACI. So first up, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you feeling today?
I'm good.
Good. Wonderful. So many people never get to see how funding decisions are made. So can you describe AACI's role in supporting and administering this process?
AACI is one of the 3 organizational entities that sponsor the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. So as one of the partner organizations, AACI, which is a coalition of 20-plus community-based organizations, ministerial alliances, social service, fraternal, and other organizations, has been critical as a vehicle for us informing the community about each step of the process that IAAQLI has gone through when we are wanting to inform what the next round of grant applications will be. AACI members are informed of that. We have AACI members that are grantees as part of the overall process. So I am both chair of AACI, but co-director of the initiative. So that has allowed us to be able to use that organizational entity as one of the supports for IAAQLI.
Yeah, I can imagine how helpful it must have been to be able to leverage the connections of organizations that already made these inroads with the Black community, and then now you actually have such incredible financial support coming in. I can't imagine how helpful that was, that you didn't have to start from scratch, but that you were able to help use these relationships that have already been built.
Yes, and those relationships also help lead to broader community relationships, because although AACI members are a diverse group, they did not necessarily cover all the issue areas that IAAQLI has been responsible for. I think, as Tony was saying, we've been involved in housing and employment, education, leadership development, entrepreneurship. And not all AACI members were involved in either developing people's skills in those areas or doing the work in those areas. So we cast our net broadly in the community and used not only those organizations, but many of the organizations had people who know the community broadly. So they could say to us, do you know about X organization that has been doing this program with mothers that are to aid them in being able to care for infants? So that's the way we mix and matched the two things.
Okay, yeah, and you set me up perfect to talk about access to this process. So how did you all ensure that this process wasn't just technically accessible, but truly fair?
Well, one of the ways that we tried to make sure that the process was fair was to have a clear firewall between the administrative staff for the initiative and those who recommended the proposals that should be funded. Ultimately, the management team would get them. But each proposal, when it came into the portal, was distributed to specialists who may have expertise in the particular areas. 3 people reviewed each proposal so that we would not have a simple bias of an individual, but a collective view of whether a proposal seemed to fit. But further, you only review a proposal that has been submitted as a result of a request for proposals. So there were written requests for proposals that laid out what was desired in a particular area. That information was distributed broadly. It was distributed on radio. It was distributed on the website, and the website was very robust so that people could go get that information for themselves. So they would have clear instructions on what would be needed in the proposal that they would put together, the application that they would make to get it, and then a formal review process. All of those things try to ensure fairness with each organization that was presented to us.
So through this, and especially with you all's knowledge and history of already working with especially Black-led organizations and Black-serving organizations, were there any barriers that you intentionally removed?
Well, yes. That was one of them.
Yeah.
Because the initiative could target Black-led, Black-staffed, Black-boarded organizations, because that was what the initiative was intending to do. That eliminated a major barrier for some organizations. Now, that did not mean that organizations didn't have to have the capacity
Right.
to be able to define how they would do the work and be able to demonstrate that they could do the work. But to have an opportunity in this community to go into a portal that is for organizations that are Black-led, Black-board, Black-supported, that was at a major elimination of barriers. And when there were majority organizations that were either partners or funded, they had to have demonstrated capacity and demonstrated experience and be endorsed for their work in Black communities.
And so because you guys worked so intentionally to remove those barriers, did it also give you a more exciting like pool of folks you could work with? Like it wasn't just, you know, the traditional same folks over and over again that you always see. What were some of the, or did you guys see new folks, and what were some of those more exciting ones that came up that maybe you guys didn't know about before?
Well, let me just say there were some new groups that emerged. For example, I had never heard of the doula group that was working. I'm not going to start calling names because I don't want anybody to say, well, why didn't you mention us? But let's say this, there were some new groups that emerged that had been doing work for many years. And they were not only not-for-profit organizations in the 501c3, there were churches that also had programs, and they too were eligible to apply.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So what kinds of technical assistance and like capacity building supports were offered to these applicants?
That was one of the things that we knew would be required, especially for organizations that did not have great bandwidth in the larger community, that they would need to, one, know what are the requirements to put together an effective proposal. So we had workshops where people had material presented to them on how to design an effective proposal. There were opportunities to talk to funders, to hear from them what it is they expected when they considered a particular proposal. The RFPs were written in a way so they would be very clear about what people would be expected to present. And we also provided opportunities after people had written a draft of their proposal. They could come in and sit with us or one of our consultants to say, here's what I'm thinking about. Does this seem to fit what you're talking about? So all of those kinds of things were put in place in order to create the greatest opportunity for a group to have a competitive proposal that might be funded.
Yeah, I love that you guys did that ahead of time. My next question was going to be around, you know, a lot of organizations will complain when they apply for a grant and they don't get it, but then they also don't get feedback. Like they don't know why they didn't get chosen, right? And that was going to be one of my questions, but you guys were kind of able to help mitigate some of those challenges ahead of time because they were able to show folks draft proposals of their submissions.
Yes, we did that. And when proposals were reviewed, if you were not eligible, we also sent communication to those organizations giving a listing of the key reasons why that particular proposal was not competitive. We would have liked to have been able to do this, but because of the size of our staff team, we didn't have the ability to do that. And that is to give individual feedback to every person. But we tried to make that list that you got sufficiently comprehensive that people could go back. But then they would be able, on another occasion, to go back and look at all the taped training sessions that were on the website so they could get a better idea about how to strengthen their proposal the next time.
I know you've been in this space for a while, and so I wonder, as you looked at this process, was there anything that you were particularly excited about? Like, man, if I was a smaller organization started out, I wish I had a process like this for us. Like, was there anything in particular that really stood out that made this different than everything else?
I think the thing that made it different for some organizations was the ability to come and talk to people once they had started putting their ideas together to see if that made sense and was consistent with what was being requested in the request for proposals. There are situations in grant world where you get an RFP maybe, but you apply and that's it.
Yeah.
And you either get it or you don't get it. But to have that intermediary opportunity to come and sit down with folks who first of all care about you and want you to be successful, to be able to say, here's what we're thinking about. Does this make sense? And while our consultants and team, we were not going to write the proposal for them. We at least could be able to give them some honest feedback. For most, it encouraged them to go further, and for some, they knew that they had additional work that they needed to do.
I love that. It fills that gap of like folks who are out here. We talk a lot about like, especially small organizations where it's like you are the one who does the work, who takes the data, who does does the grant filing, does the like everything. And so it fills that gap of, you know, that person who I'm just out here focused on the work and helping them craft like how you present this amazing thing that you're doing. Now, how do you put it on paper and actually get other folks to support it?
And that is the reason we have funded efforts for groups that will be providing that kind of training, that kind of education for individuals and groups that are out there who need that, because it's going to be much tougher in the future for people to get their paper under the door. And if they don't have the basics very well defined and don't have the basics refined, it will be very difficult to be competitive. So some of our grantees will be providing those kind of training and education experiences because we know it'll be needed in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming today, for explaining the process.
My pleasure.
I appreciate you having you here. You all, thank you for coming, for watching the podcast. This is the end of this episode, but make sure you look for other ones by following us on social media. Definitely make sure you like, share, subscribe, comment, all the things. You can always find us at I always say at IAAQLI. We appreciate you watching. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the 6 Pillars in Action podcast. The stories and insights you hear on this podcast are just one part of a much bigger movement focused on improving the quality of life for African Americans throughout Indianapolis. To learn more about the work, the impact, and the organizations helping to drive change, be sure to visit the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative website. Follow IAAQLI on social media and sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news and opportunities. Transformation is happening, and staying connected is one of the best ways to be part of it. We'll see you next time on 6 Pillars in Action.